going. Awesome. Okay, well, welcome everyone to Defend Our Bees. My name is Kylie Wagner. I am the director of Defend Our Future, and I will be your host this evening / afternoon, wherever you are in the country. If you are new to Defend Our Future, we are an organization of young people organizing across the country to demand that our leaders enact bold solutions to protect our communities and our future from the climate crisis. And we know that at the core of a successful community, there are a lot of different factors working in tandem to make sure that everyone has the ability to thrive. At the same time, climate change impacts and threatens almost all of those aspects. And today we're talking about one of our favorite little things that helps our communities keep chugging along, and that is the bees. So since it's New York Climate Week, we wanted to bring together some of our friends and experts to tell us more about the impact that bees have on our communities and why fighting for climate solutions is key not only to defending our bees, but to defending our future. And I am enjoying a bee's knees cocktail tonight to celebrate, made with some local honey that I got at my farmer's market. And you should have gotten an email this morning if you registered before today with some recipes for some bee-inspired drinks that you can enjoy with us today. You can keep putting where you are in the country and your favorite thing about bees in the chat. And with that, I will introduce the rest of my panelists. I know that in the invitation, Angel Deere was going to join us. Sadly, the Catskills has just been hit with a storm, so he will not be able to join us today, but we are sending lots of positive vibes his way, and we are still gonna learn so much about bees tonight. So with that, I will kick it over to Rebecca, who is the Managing Director of the Bee Conservancy.
Thanks, Kylie. Thank you, everyone. I'm incredibly excited to meet everyone and chat about our very good friends, the bees. I'm the Managing Director of the Bee Conservancy, which is based in New York City, and we're a national nonprofit that stewards bee health and security and habitat through education, advocacy, habitat building in communities, all sorts of good stuff, which we'll talk about. And will we be going through all the panelists, or shall I just launch right into the biggie?
Yes, Rob, if you want to introduce yourself next.
Sure, if I remember to unmute myself. Hi, I'm Rob Jensen. I'm a 5th-year beekeeper in Bethesda, Maryland, which is about 3 miles from the DC line. And the thing I love most about bees is how they collectively are able to make decisions, even though there is no one bee in charge, but they always manage to make the right decision collectively.
Well, and then I also wanted to introduce Nick. So Nick, you can introduce yourself. Nick's going to be helping us out.
I think we lost Kylie, but my name is Nick, and I'm the regional organizer with Defend Our Future based in Portland, Oregon right now. And I'd say my favorite thing about bees is how so small of a creature can have such a positive impact on its environment and everything around it. So that's my favorite thing about bees. Plus, they give us awesome fruits and vegetables too.
Did we lose Kylie?
I think we might have lost Kylie. If that is the case.
Is she the host?
Yeah. I think what we can do is Rebecca, if you'd like to start your presentation, maybe we could get into that.
Sure, I'd love to start. All right, so I'm gonna zoom, share my screen so everyone get ready for the massive takeover. Here it comes. Okay, go into present mode. So speaking of the collective way that bees communicate and make decisions, I was really excited about the topic of thinking about bees and the work that we as a nonprofit do through the lens of advocacy, right? Because we're all trying to make change, we're trying to make things better. And so voila, hive mind, cultivating community through advocacy. So I did mention, right, the main mission at the Bee Conservancy is to protect bees, safeguard the environment, and secure food justice through community-based education, research, habitat creation, and advocacy. And I get it, that's a little bit of a mouthful. But the important thing to that I've been thinking about as I've been getting ready for this talk is the idea that really it is an ecosystem, right? And we are all an ecosystem. So how can we as advocates connect across all sorts of communities, across all sorts of communication lines to introduce the ideas of bees, their importance to the world, and what people can do to sort of shepherd them and their own communities into wellness through the lens of bees. So to take a step back, I mean, I think we all know that bees are important, but I thought I'd just kind of dig into a couple of reasons why. Scientifically, bees are considered a keystone species, which means they are literally a keystone essential to healthy ecosystems and to supporting animal and human life. And when people think about bees, they're often like honeybees and bumblebees, and then they're kind of like, and then you hear the crickets chirping in the background. But there are actually 20,000 bee species worldwide, and 4,000 of them are in North America. And of those 4,000, 1 in 4 are at risk of extinction. And so why does that matter? I mean, a bazillion reasons that we're going to get into over the course of this entire conversation with the group. But native bees pollinate 80% of our flowering plants, and 1 in 3 bites of food we eat is thank you due to a bee. And so when we start thinking about the global impact, right? Again, getting back to that idea of how one bee or how one small thing can have such a huge downstream effect, they are pretty important, and due to all sorts of elements like habitat loss, climate change, pesticide use, yada yada. Bees are in crisis. 40% of honeybee colonies are dying out each year. Again, we have these extinction rates with our native bee species that, fun fact, 70% of which live underground, which, when I first heard that, that blew my mind. I was like, subterranean world of underground bees. But you get it, it's not a great situation. So what can we as people do to help? So to take a step back and to tell you a little bit about our organization, this is not so much of a spiel as a way that we've kind of tackled bridging the gap. So our primary audience in the Bee Conservancy is the general public, right? You, your best friend, my mom, etc. People who might have an interest in bees for sure, but maybe people who, for lack of a better term, might be bee adjacent, meaning they don't realize that they are in love with bees, and it's sort of our work to sort of, bridge that gap. So we have a lot of workshop and events. We're based in New York City and have a bunch of, we have a public space on Governor's Island with an apiary. And, when things due to COVID, we've had some sort of pause in the event production cycle. But, meeting people online and in person like here to talk about the message. Then we make a bunch of fun educational assets, both for adults and kids. Here there's this cute little cutout that we did with some of the jobs that that bees in the hive do, and you can color it and make paper dolls in a whole colony. And then we have a backyard bee guide that talks through different species and how to have a happy coexistence with the bees in your yard. And we teach courses. So we have a hands-on program at the Queens Zoo in Flushing Meadow Park that's all season long, and people learn how to beekeep week over week throughout the entire season. And it is definitely a seasonal week over week job. So if any of you are ever interested in learning how to be a beekeeper, get ready to tie up those Saturdays with a lot of bee work. And we're also now working on a new program to provide scholarships to some of the online programming at eCornell. Building bee habitats, right? Educating people and inspiring people is great. How do we actually physically get into the field? So we have a program called, historically, it's called Sponsor a Hive, and we're secret amongst us, but we're kind of conceptualizing it because that was more honey bee hive driven, and we've pivoted to do these native bee homes, which I'll talk a little bit about in a second. But basically, we have an application process and we provide bee habitat or bee houses to schools, nonprofits, community groups, people who might face barriers to access, whether that is to the education around having bees in their, schoolyard or farm curriculum, or community garden, to also actually the products themselves, because sometimes they do have a price tag, and not everyone might be able to have the budget to afford them. We also do have these bee sanctuaries across New York City. Some are public and where we have these engagement and fun-led events. Some are kind of just to help populate the growth that's there, for example, in the Prospect Park Zoo. That's not a demonstration space, but the Prospect Park is like gorgeous verdant area of Brooklyn, and we're trying to make sure that bees are there doing their good work. Plus, we do a bit of custom programming for some of our corporate partners, because we found that companies, and this is very interesting in terms of the advocacy space, but companies, a lot of them really are trying to connect not just with their consumers, who of course are people with passions and ideals, but actually want to align their brands with their true vision of what they feel their products like have the power to be. So you'll see a lot more sustainability initiatives, like we use less plastic. We're doing a whole downstream, water thing to make sure that the waters that we're using, or the fossil fuels that we may be burning, are somehow balanced out. And there's a real shift that I've seen happening in the few years, even that I've been working with the Bee Conservancy, with this level of interest to commit to and stand behind projects like ours to help fund the good work that we do. Lastly, and this is kind of a little forward thinking, but we, for 2022, are really kind of doubling down on this idea of community science. And some of you might have heard the phrase citizen science, which is being phased out a little bit now as we think about sort of inclusion and the language of citizen versus community. But the idea of community science is, how can we empower and inspire people just doing their thing to participate in scientific research? And so we have a program called Bee Blitz, which historically was led by a human in real life. So it took a bit of coordination. You had to show up and like march around, and it was fantastic, but limited in its impact because it had to be set up. But basically, people would go around, take photographs on the iNaturalist app, which then collects those photographs of bees, pollinators, and whatever you're photographing, and makes that database available to researchers and scientists worldwide. So we are so excited because we have a bunch of support to really double down on Bee Blitz in the coming year, to create like guides and self-led experiences. During the pandemic, we all took more walks than we've probably taken in the rest of our lives put together, and capitalize on that energy and interest in people being out in the natural world, while also facilitating research that frankly there's huge dearth on. Like there 20,000 bee species around the world. There isn't tons of data for scientists to do and understand what they need to. So this is one step that people can help do that. Lastly, we do advocacy in the very literal sense. So there's some photos here that were actually just from this past Monday, where the Bee Conservancy was asked to speak at a hearing at the New York State Capitol, because there's a bill on the table, the Birds and Bees Act, which would be to curb certain uses of neonicotinoid pesticides. And this was like the very real deal, and we were there with our partners, the NRDC, but I had to sit at that little table you see pictured there and speak to the assembly members. And our point of view, there were scientists and doctors and like really impressive and very informative people there, and we were sort of speaking to the community impact, right? And the fact that there is a groundswell of passion for action, on across all walks of life. They're crossing every lines, race, gender, class, faith, and sort of the beauty of that and the potential of what we could all do together in the spirit of advocacy. So, again, this was a lot of talking about what we do, but my hope in sort of sharing a little bit of the inside of our work is to start really getting to the touch points of all the different ways we can conceptualize what advocacy is. And I thought I'd sort of end on a really quick case study, which is, there's having the best of intentions, which we all do. Then there's a goal that you're trying to reach. And how do you bridge the gap so that you're actually walking the walk of all of your talk? Right. And so this is something we're all trying to do, which is basically how can we be better as advocates, as lobbyists, as people who are, out in the world trying to engage and inspire people. And so I'm sharing this example of our Sponsor Hive initiative this past year, where we wanted to distribute native bee homes. Part of that was because of access, right? The honeybee hives, which we're going to hear a lot about and are fascinating, they are work in that you need a trained beekeeper to take care of them. And when you're putting these things in communities, there's also concerns around sort of the volume of the bees, possible stings, et cetera. And so we were like, how can we help bolster local ecology and maybe help with some food justice programs, et cetera, in a way that creates more access for different types of people. So native bee homes, I should mention, getting back to native bee species, they live solitary lives. Native bees largely are not colony based the way you imagine a honeybee colony having like 50,000 bees at the height of the season. And they live in like holes, whether those are in logs or reeds, like broken stems, or underground. And so this thing that you see in this corner, in the lower right-hand corner, those don't have tubes in them, but those are our final houses and they're stuffed with all these tubes. But getting back to, the advocacy part and walking the walk, there are a lot of these things on the market, and we wanted to do it in a way that was user-friendly so that anyone, even little kids at a Montessori school, could kind of manipulate the house if they needed to, but also ensure that these houses themselves were really putting bee hygiene and health forward. And there's a lot of sort of critique around some of the commercial models. They're kind of mega. If you think about a huge apartment building or like, tenement style conditions, like they can get very crowded. They can be very hard to clean. It's just a whole host of things that you can imagine. So we built a very intentional house that's small. It has about 100 tubes. It fits 3 different size tubes for different species: leafcutter, mason, and small carpenter bees. The shelves that you see in each of these hexes slides out so that you can actually easily access things in there if you need to clean or remove. And so that was our first solution. Let's really research what isn't working in a lot of models and then actually design to solve for that. Then there's this idea of sustainability, right? So we made sure that our materials themselves were Forest Stewardship Council certified wood, sustainably sourced wood, which means that this wood did come from a good, like it was harvested sustainably, and also relatively locally. So I believe our wood came from Maine, and then there's this idea of it being built close to home. A lot of products are sourced overseas, and of course we support like international commerce and production. But for us, we were like, how do we do something special close to here that's not, taking boats across the ocean? And we found this amazing nonprofit, Brooklyn Woods, and we're in New York City, so it was even better that it was right around the corner. But like they're a nonprofit as well, and they train low income and underemployed individuals for woodworking careers. And we were like, this is amazing. Like we can invest in a green job pipeline, we can support, and this is the last element, like how do we provide access and opportunity for underserved communities so we can support like bringing people into a new career with beautiful handmade, and these are handmade too. So these are actual like artisan crafts. So anyway, this is all to say, right? Like we thought about our work, and I wanted to share this example with you because, and look, is it perfect? Obviously we can get better, and we're thinking of so many different ways to get better, right? Our packaging, very sustainable, et cetera. But we were just psyched to be able to do something that we felt we could really stand behind. And we tried at least to be as intentional as we could, thinking of every intersection and every choice, and how can we make a choice that advocates, all right, promotes like the bigger picture of sustainable advocacy or environmental advocacy that we aim towards. So that's kind of like the thank you, the like high level chit chat of, what we do and why we do it. And yeah, that's it. And we're going to chat about other things in a bit. So that's the Bee Conservancy from me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rebecca. I definitely want to learn more and follow along with all the work you're doing. It sounds so amazing. Also, I apologize, my computer died, so that's why I disappeared briefly. But is it a quarantined talk if there's not a tech problem? No. All right, so along those lines, we are now going to magically travel back in time. Nick and Rob had a chat about an on-site chat about how to create your own hive and how bees are impacted by climate change. So Nick, I will ask you to roll the clip. And if you have questions for our experts, you can put them in the chat and we'll be doing a Q&A later. So we definitely want to hear your questions.
Thanks, Kylie. Yeah, Rob was generous enough to show me and my colleague Jonathan around his beehives a couple weeks ago, and we did a little Q&A afterwards.
A new feature. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Rob. Rob Jensen is joining us from the DC Beekeepers Alliance. Rob is a beekeeper in the Maryland area and has spent some time, quality time with me and thousands of our closest friends, the bees, this a couple weeks ago, going in depth on how to maintain and operate a beehive. Which was a lot of fun. So I really appreciate you, Rob, for joining us this evening. And yeah, I think the biggest question that folks
Nick,
like myself and others have.
We can't see your screen. We have sound, but we don't have any video.
Cool, thank you. Let me check in on that.
Now I feel like I manifested another tech problem. So
Mercury is in retrograde, I have heard. I just can't say that enough this week.
yes, that's definitely it.
Yeah, let me figure out how we can make this happen.
Stop screen sharing and try screen sharing again, see if it works this time.
Okay.
Sometimes that's all it takes.
Yeah, if not, we can just do it on out of the recordings. So let's see here.
Thanks everyone for bearing with us. Okay, now we can see it.
You can see it now?
Yes.
Great.
Awesome.
Can
you hear it?
A new feature.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Rob. Rob Jensen is joining us from the DC Beekeepers Alliance. Rob is a beekeeper in the Maryland area and has spent some time, quality time with me and thousands of our closest friends, the bees, this a couple weeks ago, going in depth on how to maintain and operate a beehive, which was a lot of fun. So I really appreciate you, Rob, for joining us this evening. And yeah, I think the biggest question that folks like myself and others have that can't maintain a beehive is, what specifically can we do to help the pollinators, the honeybees that are living in our neighborhoods? And it can be, small, whatever. What are the things that we can do to really help these bees?
Hey, Nick. So there's a couple of things. Habitat and forage are very important. So green lawns are basically a desert for bees and other pollinators. There's really nothing for them to eat there. So if you can take some part of your well-manicured lawn, even if it's a chunk of your backyard, and make a pollinator-friendly garden. So get rid of the grass and plant a pollinator seed mix, or you can plant some flowering shrubs. Almost anything that flowers is good for some pollinators. The best thing to do is to find out what is best for the native bees in your area. So for example, here we would use a mid-Atlantic pollinator mixture of native plants, and that helps to feed our mid-Atlantic local bees who have co-evolved with plants in this area. That's one thing you can do. The other thing you can do is, especially in the fall, leave some lawn debris on your lawn, even if it's just a small part of your lawn, because many of the bee species and other pollinators, butterflies, wasps, all of those overwinter in the debris, the leaves and twigs that accumulate. And so if you rake everything up, you're basically also raking up the next generation of pollinators and sending them off to the dump. So you don't want to do that. And again, you know, you're going to have to deal with your neighbors, and your neighbors are going to be like, well, you can't just leave your leaves out all over the place. So just pick a corner of your yard, someplace, the backyard, and very gently move the lawn debris there and let it sit over the winter. And in the spring, about April, after the pollinators have emerged and have started making their new colonies, then it's okay to pick it up and compost it. Pesticides of all sorts, herbicides or insecticides, very important, if you can't avoid using them altogether, is to read the label and use them appropriately, because one of the big problems is just people think, you know, one spritz is what is needed, then let's pour half the bottle and that's better. Well, that tends to leave a lot of residue. If you read the label, it also says, like, do not spray when the bees are flying, because the bees will take that back and they'll have a buildup of pesticides, and that will make them sick. What else? Those are the three big ones. Forage, forage and habitat, and going easy on the pesticides.
And if you're gonna go all out, definitely get rid of that manicured lawn.
Oh yes. Oh, that's the fourth one. Thank you. Let your lawn grow. So set your lawnmower at a high cut, and let the weeds, you know, let the dandelions and the clover grow in your lawn, so you can have a clover lawn, which is just as green. It's not, you know, perfect tall fescue, but that will provide some forage in your lawn, and then you can come with the lawnmower afterwards and clip the heads off after the clover shrivels up or the dandelions shrivel up. So that's also a really good food source for all those insects.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I know that there's a lot of folks that are interested in how to help the bees. For folks that are interested in taking the plunge into having a beehive in their backyard, or multiple beehives and apiary in their backyard, what are the steps that folks can take to get started on becoming a bee owner?
So there's a couple different ways you can do that. One of which, as you know, our mutual friend Rick is hosting beehives for me. And so that is one of the things you can do, is get in touch with a local bee club and try and get in touch with a beekeeper who is looking for a yard where they can keep some beehives. And then you really don't have anything to do other than enjoy watching the bees. And come harvest time, your beekeeper will bring you honey or beeswax or whatever product to the hive, and you don't have to worry about suiting up or getting stung or anything like that. But if you're really interested in becoming a beekeeper, urban or suburban, my recommendation, first thing you do, get in touch with your local beekeeping club. And if you don't know if one exists, you can, if you're on the East Coast, connect with the Eastern Apiculture Society. And if you're on the West Coast, the Western Apiculture Society, and they will have lists of state level organizations, and the state level organizations will have the local clubs. So find a beekeeping club close to you and start meeting local beekeepers and talking to them. You're going to want to find a mentor at somebody to walk you through the steps. You don't want to do this cold. I also recommend very strongly you plan on taking a formal introduction to beekeeping class instead of trying to learn beekeeping by buying a bunch of equipment and watching YouTube videos, because like so many other pieces of information on the internet, there's little tiny bits of wisdom surrounded by a lot of garbage. And in beekeeping, there's a lot of people who provide a lot of misinformation on the internet. So I recommend, one of my mentors has said that the internet has killed more bees than everything else, every other challenge that honeybees have to face. But once you've taken a class and you found a mentor and you've got the equipment, you'll learn how to find an appropriate space that will be good for the good for the bees and good for the beekeeper as well. You want a non-hazardous location when you go in there, because when you have a bunch of upset bees chasing you around, you don't want to be tripping over things. That's really it. And again, very important, talk to other beekeepers, because it's very rewarding, but it is also very challenging sometimes. It's a goodly amount of work. It can be expensive to get started. And then after your first year, it can be challenging to figure out what to do with all the honey, because the bees are going to make lots and lots of honey, and all of a sudden you're going to be like, what am I going to do with 100 pounds of honey? I just wanted 2 jars.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the biggest takeaway is don't just Google it, ask for help, and have your local beekeepers help you along the process.
They're
Awesome.
very good. They're very good communities all over the United States to support new beekeepers or people interested in beekeeping.
Cool. And I guess the last question for you is very pertinent to defend our future and our goals, is talking about climate change. We know science has told us that climate change is affecting organisms in every part of the ecosystem, from top to bottom, from the ants all the way up to humans and bigger than us. What effect do these new, more powerful, more devastating storms that we're starting to see, like the hurricanes that hit the East Coast this past year, what does that effect have on bees? And is climate change having a negative impact on the bee populations?
There's a lot of research that is being done in this in a lot of different arenas. The bees have their rhythm that is tied to the rhythm of the plants, and so if the climate change is changing the life cycle of the flowers that the bees depend on, it's also going to affect the life cycle of the bees. They may be pre-programmed to start looking for forage on a particular plant in April, and that plant maybe's blooming in June now, or it's not blooming at all. So it affects their food sources. But the rain, the storms especially, when it rains, not only does it affect pollinators in that they usually don't fly when it's raining, and especially if we have severe storms, they just can't go out to gather food. But the severe storms will also, they'll knock down trees, and trees are some of the best sources of forage for bees, because it's like one gigantic flower. And so if the flowers get knocked off, or if the nectar gets washed off of the blooms, then that's 2 days that the bees have no food to bring in. And my honeybees specifically, they're gathering nectar in order to make honey to provide food for themselves to last through the whole winter. So if you lose more days of food gathering, then they're not going to be able to store enough for the winter. There are other potential impacts that we really haven't even begun to consider yet. I'm sure you've heard about Africanized honeybees.
Yeah.
And they've pretty much been stopped in the southern states of the United States from moving further north, because our winters are too cold for them to survive. Well, if our winters start getting warmer,
Yeah.
then maybe they can start moving further north, and so then we'll have that line of safety, which is right now, Georgia, Florida, Texas. It may start moving further north. So
Interesting.
that's another concern we have. Yeah, it's everything is interrelated, and bees,
Yeah.
the bees ecosystem is very tightly tied with weather. They use the sun and the magnetic field of the earth to navigate. And if that starts to be changed, if the parameters start to change because of climate change, then that can affect our bees as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'd say we need to do everything to protect the bees.
Yes, well, and all our pollinators,
On all of our pollinators.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yes, definitely. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to not only show me hands-on, luckily I didn't get stung, but hands-on showing me how to operate a beehive and the process that you go through on a daily basis of maintaining these beehives. It was really, really something spectacular to see.
I enjoyed having you. Anytime you want to come back, I've got plenty of hives, and never will turn down an extra pair of strong hands to help.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you joining our event tonight as well. And if folks are interested, I can drop Rob's email in the chat if you're in the Maryland area and are looking for a good beekeeper. So
there you go.
Thank you again, Rob, and we'll talk a little bit later.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob, for all your amazing knowledge, and Nick, great questions. Amazing interviewing. We do have a video of Nick and Jonathan's visit to the hive. So I think that's on our Instagram. Is that right, Nick?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so if you want to see that video, we're at Defend Our Future on Instagram. So you can see that there and see inside the hive, comment any other questions that you have. So we will get to the Q&A very shortly. I'm seeing some questions pop in the chat, and you can also use the Q&A function. But before we do that, I want to take advantage of the hive mind that we have here and hear some bee facts from Rebecca and Rob.
All right, everybody, get ready.
Okay, well, you stole my first one, Rebecca. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to get everyone like amped. So, we've been talking about bees in sort of the abstract, what to do about them, how to advocate for them. But I think like we're about to get like pretty serious about some bee details here. So I don't know, would you like to start?
Okay, well, you've got the three, I guess we sometimes call them castes, but I don't like that word. The three classes of bees, workers and drones and queens. The workers and queens are female and the drones are male. And as all of my female compatriots in the beekeeping community will say, the women do all the engineering, all the planning, all the work, and the men really don't do much other than serve as genetic material delivery vehicles. This is the way we say it for the under 10 crowd. And any further questions on that line, we send to their parents. But as a drone human, I should say that the life of a drone bee is it's pleasant most of the time, but long term, you have about 1 in 10,000 chance of mating with a queen bee. And if you should luck out and mate, you die instantly. And if you don't, then you spend the rest of the summer waiting for a queen to go by. And in the fall, you're dragged kicking and screaming out of the hive by your sisters and left to starve and freeze to death. So that's it for the drone bees.
Well, if I may, we'll co-host the drone bee narrative, because just to drill down a little bit more. So as Rob was saying, yes, when you hear the phrase worker bee, that basically means female bee. So, you know, all these jobs, the second they're born, like nurse, they're the nurses, the architects, the foragers, the guard bees, the undertakers, meaning they clean out, you know, the dead bees, they attend to the queen, like they actually do everything. So when we talk about this moment that happens in fall, which is just around the corner, you literally have, you know, like the grasshopper who sang all summer or whatever that thing is, like basically the female ants who have stockpiled all this honey, they packed in some pollen, you know, they are ready for the winter, are like these drones who you could see in the middle. So if you look at this image, the drones are the middle size here. And, you know, they're kind of big and lumbering and they don't do anything. They're sort of like that roommate from college who has just been crashing on your couch forever. And that's why the females are like, it was so fun, you know, like Dave and Jim to hang out. But it's about to be winter, and that's when we eat our honey stores that we've worked so hard to make all summer. And you didn't help. So good luck. And that's when they get kicked out. So that's just a little bit more behind the scenes of why. And I realized I didn't do my favorite fun fact, and that's kind of it, which is kind of dark maybe, but you know, the science is dark. But you know, drones are important. So we're not trying to undercut the value of drones because they are responsible for the genetic material. And maybe we can now, Rob, what do you think? Tell them a little bit about queens and how that happens, and you know,
So
yeah.
the queen, the queen spends most of her life in the dark in the hive. Every queen will leave the hive at least once in her life, and that is on her mating flight. In order to maintain genetic diversity, although your average beehive has maybe 4,000, in the summer, maybe 4,000 drones and maybe 50,000 workers, it will only have one queen. And if she is a new queen, she will not mate with the drones in her hive because all the bees in that hive are her daughters and sons for the most part. So she will fly anywhere from 1.5 to 3 miles away from her hive to mate with drones from other hives. And she will mate with anywhere from, science is now telling us, between 12 and 20. People used to think it was a much smaller number. And in some cases, they found that the queen mates with as many as 40 or 50 drones. And then she stores the sperm from all the drones she's mated with because they're all dead now. And she comes back to the hive. And for the rest of her life, which could be anywhere from 2 to 5 years, she will lay eggs anywhere from 1,000, 1,500, maybe as many as 2,000 eggs per day. And each egg she lays, she will decide at that time whether it should be a male egg or a female egg. And the way she makes that decision is by measuring the size of the cell that she's about to lay an egg in. And so if you watch a queen bee in an observation hive, you will see her first put her head in and she will measure, I don't know if you can see my hands, she will measure the diameter of the cell. And if it's a small cell, she will lay a female egg. And if it is a large cell, she will lay a male egg. And she controls that in her body.
And, you know, people might wonder, where does the queen even come from? Because there's only one of her and there's up to 50,000 of everybody else. And there is an interesting, that is less in her control. Does that sound right, Rob? So she'll lay some female eggs, and the hive itself and the hive mind, first of all,
they decide when they need a new queen or multiple
they decide.
queens. Yeah.
So it's like rebellion, but it might not be. So sometimes, you know, in the best case scenario, the queen lives her lovely, you know, 4 to 5 years. She's slowing down a little bit. And then they're like, okay, you've done great, but we're kind of ready for the next gen. And they'll make a new queen. But sometimes a queen could get sick. She could get injured. Sometimes there's beekeeper activity where maybe she gets squished. And so there are all sorts of reasons why they might make a new queen. But the process of making a queen is kind of interesting because there's so all eggs are fed something called royal jelly, which is like some proteins and some acids, and like mostly drones and workers get it. Is it about 3 days of royal jelly,
Yeah,
Rob?
2 to 3 days. Yep. And then they
So-
switch them to diet of honey and pollen.
Yep. So that's cool. I'm just gonna grow up to be like a regular citizen. But for the queens, bam, it's like full-time royal jelly. And she gestates for 16 days, which is the shortest window of all of the bee classes. And so they fill up her cell with it, they close her up, and then she finished gestating, and they'll make a few, right? Because they're not going to put all of their royal jelly in one egg basket, so to speak. They'll make like 4 to 5 or maybe even more. And there'll be several queens gestating, and one will come out first. One is always first. And it's this very Game of Thrones moment where she's like, I have arrived. And then she goes and kills all the other ones. Because she's like,
it's not only does she kill all her sisters, she will try to kill all of her sisters while they are still in their cells.
yeah.
So the one who emerges first is usually the victor. But she has some help, because all the other queens, when the first one emerges, she starts pipping. She makes a pipping sound. And her sisters, even though they haven't fully emerged yet, they will call out to her and tell her where she is. So she will pip and they will make a quacking sound, and she'll be able to find her sisters, because the beehive's this very large space, and she'd be running around searching, all these cells, but they're all calling to each other. And so they make it very easy. And if two queens happen to emerge and they're both running around at the same time, then there will be a down and out royal fight. And they will fight each other with claw. They will fight each other by biting each other. They will fight each other by trying to sting each other. But people who have studied these queen fights in great detail have found that if there is a moment where both queens are in danger of stinging each other simultaneously, they will both back off to their separate corners, regroup, and start to fight again, because they are evolutionarily programmed not to kill both of them. Because, of course, if both queens die, then the hive's really in trouble, because they can recreate a new queen in an emergency if they have eggs. But 17 days later, after the queens have emerged, there hasn't been a queen in 17 days. So if both your queens die during your queen fight, it's game over for the hive. Unless
you're
the beekeeper
basically
fixes it.
losing. Well, it's that losing of the 1 to 2,000 eggs being laid a day, right? So there's a real population issue that gets hurt once you don't have a queen. And so I think what you were starting to say, Rob, is that there are things that beekeepers can do if they're like, oh no, there's no queen, which is purchase a queen. There are queen, not on the black market, it is legit. But there are people
we did have an open air queen market here in the streets of Washington, D.C. one year. It was kind of interesting. I needed to buy a queen in a hurry, and I pulled up in front of some guy's house in a shady corner of DC and handed him some money out the window, and he handed me something back in my window. And it turns out later that there was a police car right up the street, and I guess he thought we were okay, because it would have been very interesting if I got pulled over to explain that I had a live queen bee in a little wooden box, which is what that transaction was about. Stranger things have happened. Yeah.
But then you'll notice, like, even in these images, the queen structure, which is, you'll see, I guess, in the top row all the way to the right, the longest body, the least furry, because she's less concerned about pollinating because she's going to stay in the hive. The queen body, they have those like colored dots on them, and in some cases numbers. But just a fun fact for the group listening, like you can get what's called a marked queen, which is literally a queen with a marking on it, and the color will correspond to her year. And so that way, like if you're in a hive and you're just poking around and you see her, because it's not easy to see the queen. If you imagine like a wall of 50, a couple thousand bees on any frame, they're not, she's covered, they want to protect her. But a big splash of color can be easy to see.
That also tells the beekeeper if they have replaced her. So I might be perfectly happy if I have my good queen who's been there a couple of years, and I've marked her, and then all of a sudden I go check and I see a queen running around in there and she does not have that mark on her. then I know that something has happened and she has been replaced, or the hive swarmed, something happened and there's been a queen event. One of the most frequent, a funny thing, one of the most frequently asked questions when I take a observation hive to a farmer's market or to the county fair, everybody sees, this year it's a white spot for this year. Everybody sees the white spot and they say, oh, do they all have a white spot on them? And I have to explain, no, I paint the white spot on the queen after we get a new queen. It's not a natural artifact. And some years it's white, some years it's blue. But that is by far the most frequently asked question when I take live bees for people to see.
All right, great. I think that concludes our fun facts for fun. So thanks, Rob, my co-hosting the fun facts section of
My pleasure. Oh, speaking of Jim Fisher.
Is he here?
There is a James Fisher here. I don't know if it's the James Fisher.
Let us know if you are the James Fisher in the chat.
James Fisher of
who
Bee
taught
Quick
me how
fame.
to be. You taught me how to become a beekeeper. If that is in fact Jim.
Great. Well, thank you. Those facts were very fun and extremely dramatic. I don't think that I realized that it was like a soap opera meets fantasy adventure when going on in the beehives. So we are getting several questions in the chat, plus I have some of my own questions for you. So let's kick it off with some of the ones that we've seen. I think first was about, says somewhere between around 40 million people in the United States consider themselves to be gardeners, and wondering how you and your organizations work with gardening associations to do knowledge and outreach, and kind of if that's a partnership that exists and how that has been helpful.
Yeah, I can maybe start with that, which is I love hearing, I never heard that statistic of 40 million gardeners, so I hope that is true. One, in terms of partnerships, yeah, there's several ways we do that. I mean, again, I mentioned our Sponsor a Hive program, and this year we distributed 500 homes across the US and Canada and to several hundred organizations. A couple got more than one home, but that did include garden organizations, community gardens, as well as like a couple of botanical gardens. So there is that piece where we're just, trying to work with them to make sure they have great tools to support local pollinators. But in addition, there are some like assets and fun facts and things that we are creating, which I think there are a couple in the presentation that I gave, but like, how can we help people become better and more aware gardeners, right? Meaning, and I think that there's some other questions that we'll get to in the Q&A that address some of these questions directly, but we like to explore and think about ways to disseminate that information through all the channels where people consume them. So it could be anywhere from social media to talks at garden clubs, which we do. We have a couple of scheduled in New York City, which is where we're based, but with the internet and Zoom, we can go anywhere. So those are just some of the touch points that we have.
Awesome. And Rob, I know you spoke about people who can have beehives in their gardens, and working with people, like working with a mentor. Anything to add on working with gardeners specifically?
So since where I'm at is right at the intersection between Washington, D.C. and Maryland and Virginia, I am connected with 3 neighborhood bee clubs, essentially, or regional bee clubs. And all 3 of them we have master gardeners who are also beekeepers, and we have some master gardeners who participate in the process. And so there's a lot of, if you pardon the pun, cross-pollination between gardening people and beekeeping. And very often we will participate in garden events. We'll bring a observation hive and talk to people about honeybees and pollinators, and we'll have people coming in and talk to us about different things that we can plant for forage, and also teaching us about things that are good forage for our bees and also for all the other bees and pollinators.
Awesome. As we're talking about what to plant, I think we also saw a question in the chat about, I think the question is around like invasive species and supporting native bees. I have now lost the question. But,
yeah, so
I found it. It says honeybees are not native to North America. Clover, dandelion, and most common garden flowers are not good for native pollinators. Is this true? And what can we do to support pollinators without bringing in invasive species that are going to have a negative impact on the larger ecosystem?
So as I mentioned in the tape, everybody's local ecosystem is there are native plants for where you are at, and the native pollinators where you're at, for the most part, have co-evolved with specific flowers in that area, and the flowers have co-evolved with the bees. I guess that's what co-evolve means, so I'm being redundant. But so the key is, for example, if you want to plant pollinator friendly flowers, and I discovered this the hard way after many years of scattering wonderful packets of seeds from Montana all over my Maryland yard. I realized that I was not doing the right thing. And so now I'm sourcing seeds from a seed conservancy in Pennsylvania, and they have a pollinator mix that is curated by the Xerxes Society. And they have several different mixes. So if you live in New York State, there's a particular pollinator mix you want to plant in that area. If you're in mid-Atlantic, there's a particular one. So that's really key. And that is one place where you definitely want to work with master gardeners in your area. Invasives are tricky. For honeybees specifically, honeybees will forage on just about anything. So they're perfectly happy with the invasives, but your local natives are probably not going to be able to make use of the invasives, and the invasives are problematic botanically as well. So the key is to figure out what grows in your area that is native to your area, and then you can't do it all in 1 year, but gradually get rid of the invasives, bring in native pollinator friendly, and don't forget flowering shrubs and trees as well, because they are a much larger source. I love planting wildflowers. I give wildflower seeds, local wildflower seeds, to everybody who buys honey from me, and give them as gifts. But flowers, it takes something like I don't remember what the statistic is, but 40,000 trips to a flower to make 1/8 of a teaspoon of honey or something like that. So a tree which has all these blooms in one place, any species of bee can gather a lot more nectar from a tree than from small flowers.
I think one thing that I would add to that, and those are all great suggestions, and like getting back to some of what Rob started to talk about in his video, native bees, 70% of them underground, right? So they're underfoot. And there are a lot of gardening techniques to think about to help foster that habitat for them. So obviously we definitely want them to have food and forage, but we also have to have some place for them to go. So if you think about things like mulch, which conceptually we love, oh, let's block down some weeds, it looks really nice. That actually is like it's like putting like huge blankets over like where they want to go and live. And so if you can kind of find spaces to dedicate within your yard, if not the whole yard, that is sort of like kind of more untouched and wild, allowing them to have space to build a home, that's a really great tip as well. And it's pretty passive, because then you're literally not doing extra gardening in that corner of your yard.
Low maintenance pollinator tip, love that. Thank you so much. Our next question from Stephen is about the environmental impacts on bees. So with all the threats to various species of bees, what is the relative importance or the difference in impacts between of air pollution and climate change? So we know that climate change has a big impact on bees. Does air pollution also have an impact?
I think like on a very high level, it's hard to isolate and kind of surgically point a finger at any one harmful thing and its direct impact on bees, right? Unless you're like literally pinching it and killing it. Because unfortunately, like the ecosystem we live in with all of our interdependencies in a positive way, the same thing is still the case with factors like pollution, pesticides, you know, loss of habitat, monocrop cultures, like bad soil. So, and it's all part of the same big disaster. No, that's not very optimistic. We're doing the right thing by having this conversation. So, you know, to that end, if you think about what air pollution is, right, and what it impacts across not just bee species, but plant species, humans, and like how, you know, because environmental justice is social justice. So you have a lot of like areas. So the whole thing is, my point is that it's very ecosystem based. So I would just encourage anyone on this call, like if there is a specific cause that you're interested in, you're clearly talking to the bee nerds, but you know, if you are concerned about air or water or soil or food waste, like all of these things have an impact. So getting back to the advocacy piece, like go for it, because every little thing, like this is a multi-pronged kind of not great situation we're in right now, and kind of attacking from all sides. And through all streams of alarm, I think is impactful if we all do it together.
Yes, you're definitely speaking our language. We know that these issues reach so deeply from very specific things like a tiny little bee to the air that we're all breathing. So it's important that we see this as a systems problem versus an individual problem. So I think, to be really simple with it, yes, air pollution does have a strong impact on the bees in the same way that it does on us and our communities. And we know that carbon pollution leads to increased climate change. So we're happy that you're all here learning about how you can take action and fight for climate solutions and solutions to pollution. Rob, do you have anything to add on this question?
No, you know, I'd never really thought specifically about air pollution, smog, that sort of thing. As a beekeeper, we spray a lot of smoke on the bees, and probably to some extent we're making a little bit of local air pollution ourselves in the interest of helping the bees. But we put our smokers out as quickly as we can. We use as little smoke as we can. So yeah, I'm sure it has an impact. And like Rebecca said, the problems that bees are having is really kind of a five-headed monster. Yeah, environmental impact of all sorts has something to do with it. We have a pest that is also a major contributor, and one of the things that we've been learning is that many of the problems that bees have been having, specifically honeybees, has to do with the way this particular pest damages the bee, and the damage impacts the way that the bee can handle pesticides. It damages the way the bee can handle nutritional deficits. And so it's very likely that air pollution is also a contributor to the problem that bees are having.
Great. As we're talking about things that are a threat to bees, maybe a lighter question, not about our impending doom. So we had a question about someone whose friend had a beehive that was attacked by a black bear. So can you tell us about some like natural predators to bees? So aside from climate change and all the things that our human society is doing to the bees, what are some of the natural predators?
You want to take turns, Rebecca?
I just want to say that that once happened to me, and I had an electric fence, and the bear like dragged the hive, and now I do like many ratchet straps crossed back and forth on my hive so that the drag. But that's why I squeeze my head, and maybe you can just do all the talking because I have to recover now.
Okay, so bears, skunks, raccoons, human beings. We have problems with human beings destroying hives out of vandalism. There's some bee haters out there. There's some predatory insects, for example, various species of wasp, not just the murder hornets in the Pacific Northwest, but there are East Coast European hornets can do a lot of damage. What else?
Something that's surprising actually, and another fun fact is that, you know, in the winter, the honeybees are in there, right? And they cluster together and they keep temperatures of like 90 degrees and like sort of like the Empire penguins in the movie where they're all like, you know, and so small animals like mice, voles, etc., like to get up in there because it is just being near the furnace.
Warm and there's food. Yeah, it's a great place for small animals in the winter.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of a surprise one.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've had to deal with a few hives that were killed by rodents this year. They blocked off the entrance entirely, so the bees couldn't get out. Yeah, humans. We don't always think about humans, but humans can be a problem. I'm trying not to. Go ahead.
Sorry. Well, I was just going to say, like, you know, Winnie the Pooh has sort of set up this model that like bears, for example, are interested in the honey, which sure, it's, you know, tasty, sweet, like carb load. But actually, like the brood and the baby bees gestating themselves are an amazing source of protein, which actually as humans, you know, we've been looking at all sorts of like insect related protein based food. It's the same thing, except they're like juicier. So that is like that's one of the incentives for reasons why a lot of creatures are in there, because they're like, this is like dinner and delicious and, you know, the whole nine.
Well, the beekeepers out there would appreciate if we could just find a way to get people to enjoy eating drone brood as part of their protein source. We would provide food at a low cost source, and at the same time help to reduce a problem with the varroa mite, which plagues our bees as well. And then we have microscopic pests. We have small insects. We have a beetle that doesn't prey directly on the bees, but its life cycle, it reproduces in the hives, and its larvae go through and eats the honey and slimes the honey, and the bees get upset and they leave, and sometimes they don't survive that. We have mites, which are very similar to ticks, and they are very problematic. Not individually, a mite doesn't do a lot of harm to a bee, but they spread viruses between the bees like crazy, and they also do damage to the bees, the equivalent to the bee's liver. So yeah, they do damage the individual bee as well. That was an error.
And the way the mites, you know, and there's several species actually of mites that they deal with, the varroa mite being the most kind of notorious one at the moment, but they live on the bee body. Like, so from the larval state. So, you know, when Rob mentioned like wanting to get rid of drones, like for example, they particularly like a big juicy fat drone brood. So that's why like beekeepers, like we actually fed a bunch of drone frames to some chickens a couple weeks ago, because we were like, there is because you have to check for mites and you see that there's a population. But then otherwise, like once the adult bee is formed, the mite's still hanging out. Like they're parasites. They're like, you know, on your shoulder, like wearing a cat that's like making you kind of tired and unhealthy. So that's if you ever want to Google things that will make you feel kind of uncomfortable and sad, that's a good one for mites on bees.
Yes, and hopefully the other pest, the other mite, is hopefully going to stay in Southeast Asia, which is Tropicalaps, which is very scary. So that's about as small. Oh, and then we've got fungi and viruses. So from the small, I think the largest predator is the bear, though. I'm very curious, Rebecca, did you have your bear fence up before you put beehives there or after?
Yeah, and actually, I don't know. So Jim Fisher, by the way, who's in the chat, who did teach me how to become a beekeeper and be quick. I had asked him, so when I learned, and so I'd set up an electric fence first, and it's possible maybe the electric fence wasn't working so great because those need to be maintained. And this gets back to what Rob was saying earlier, that like you need to learn a lot of things to become a beekeeper. And it's not just this like, you know, zenned out, like, oh, I'm one with it. You're not one with anything. It's like, so the electric fence should have been set up okay. It just powered through, and it had been after a really long winter. So it was early in the spring. So a lot of things are happening there for everybody. It was a mild winter, so the bears, I think, were active a little sooner. There was no forage for them. And so when we start talking again about ecosystems and interconnectivity and how is climate change affecting things, you know, there happened to be this very new, it was, I guess, early April, like the earliest week of April, I just got a new package of bees, which is when some beekeepers can start with a new hive. And they were just like, dang, it is food for the first time in months, and tore it apart. So, you know, the interconnectivity goes on, and that's just something to keep in mind as we kind of sally forth to make a difference.
I love Jim's comment. You must remember to hang tasty bacon on the fence to teach the bears early.
No, it's true. So they'll touch their little, they'll go right after it and they'll touch the nose and then they get zapped, because that's like, I think their one sensitive spot, right? Which is why I'm supposed to like punch them, or is that a shark you punch in the nose? Anyway, they get, okay, well then misinformation, don't repeat that. But it's true that if you lure them to the fence and then they start getting zapped, theoretically at least, you know, they're not going to be as into it in the future and they'll stay away.
Fortunately, we don't have bears down here. Very,
So
very
lucky.
infrequently do they wander near DC.
Soon, climate change and everything.
That's true.
Yes. So I think we have a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. Thank you everyone for sticking around. So I have a question on why is it important that we are inspiring and engaging and educating people in communities to become advocates for bees and for their communities in general? I'm particularly interested in, Rebecca, you mentioned being able to go and talk to legislators as a member of the community, not necessarily only as a scientist or as an expert in bees. So this is something that we talk about a lot, is that you don't have to be a climate scientist to care about climate change and to talk to your elected officials who work for you. So why is it so important that as a community, we are raising our voices for the bees and for the other issues that are impacting our neighborhoods?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think like the reasons to advocate for bees are as diverse as we are as human beings and our needs, right? So, you know, getting back to like the food justice piece, bees can be a managed species that help communities grow food where they might be in a food desert, or they might not have access or income, et cetera, to get healthy organic produce, and maybe they're, you know, opting out of the rest of it. But it's important, but then there's other things. There's educational pieces, there's ecological pieces. Again, the activity of a single bee, as we've discussed over and over again in this call, impacts so many different life streams and like gives literal rise and like let so many things bloom. And so the ways we can get involved are actually more surprising and multifold than one would think. Like absolutely call the government, you know, look around and see what legislation is happening both locally and nationally. Sure, but you know, what can you do on a local level? Like, where can you volunteer and help? What can you learn and bring back to new communities? Where are spheres where you have influence? Like, let's say you're, I don't know, like a sneaker influencer on Instagram, but maybe you suddenly start dropping in some nuggets to your 40 million sneakerhead lovers about, you know, bees and the need for pollination. I mean, the intersection and the opportunity for advocacy is so broad if you're just like 2 cents creative. Like even if you get off the, you know, this call tonight and hopefully one person is like interested and they tell their friend, that is in itself peer-to-peer advocacy, right? So yes, we obviously telling our friends is great and then doing more is great, but there's also maybe an intimidation factor, I think, around the term advocacy, where suddenly you think, if I'm not marching and I don't have 50 signs and 100 people behind me, this isn't the work. but actually the work is just being like a good person and advocating for good things in your actions and in your deeds. Or at least that's how I look at it. I mean, obviously there's super impactful things we can do, but you know, you have to be able to meet people where they're at, and based on time, access, availability, and even interest, you know, you're going to get a span. And so we don't want to really discourage people at one end of the spectrum versus the people who are like, you know, at the front of the charge. Yeah, that's it.
Yes, we need as many people as possible to solve these problems. And so there is no small impact that you can have. Everybody can make a difference. Rob, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. You know, small steps, you know, learn about how to use pesticides properly if you have to use them at all. A lot of people don't realize that the stuff they're spraying on their lawns or in their flowers are harming, you know, not just honeybees, they're harming native bees, they're harming butterflies. Little things that you can learn and tell somebody else about, talk to your neighbors, talk to your kids, and have them talk to their friends at school. It's, you know, kind of a growing network factor instead of trying to do a top-down sort of communication thing.
Totally. All right, before I get to my very last question, as promised, we are going to do a little giveaway. So we have some Defend Our Bees enamel pins that you can put on like a jean jacket or bulletin board or something. And we have a Defend Our Future t-shirt. And Nick has done a random drawing. So Nick, you want to announce who our winner is?
Thanks, Kylie. Yes, drum roll, please. Jenny Lee is our winner. So Jenny, if you're in the chat, we'd love to get some Defend Our Future bee gear out to you. So slide into our DMs or whatever.
Yay, congratulations, Jenny. Yes, you can private message Nick your address so that you don't have to tell everybody your address. And we will, or your email, and we'll connect with you to make sure that that gets to you. Great. And so then finally, I know that I have learned a lot about bees in the last hour. Thank you to Rebecca and Rob once again so much for sharing all of your knowledge with us. So my last question is, what is one thing that people can do to help the bees and to defend bees in their community? Rob, you want to go first?
I was going to let Rebecca go first.
Oh, okay.
I was trying to give you, yeah. I mean, we had so many tips today. So maybe on the advocacy tip, I would just say, take whatever inspiration you have from conversations around bees and impart it to someone else.
Awesome.
That's excellent. And that kind of dovetails into, I think, go out and learn something new about bees or pollinators and how you can help them. Find your local beekeeping club. Many of them are becoming more interested in more than just honeybees. A lot of them are getting into helping look after local bees, and many of their websites have information of things you can do to help bees. And so learn something new and then impart that. Once you've learned it, impart it to somebody else as well.
Awesome. And then from our end as well, we've talked a lot about how climate change impacts bees. And right now, Congress is considering legislation that will mean huge strides toward addressing the climate crisis. So investments in clean energy, advancing electric vehicles, creating a civilian climate corps. All these amazing programs are on the table right now that will really help defend our communities from climate change and protect the bees. So if you want to reach out to your members of Congress, we'll put a link to that petition in the chat. So you can take one action right away, super easy. And with that, I think yes, Jonathan just put that in the chat. Thank you. And we also have been live streaming on Facebook. So if you want to go to Defend Our Future on Facebook, and you want your action to be sharing all the knowledge that you just learned with some friends, you could share with a lot of your friends by sharing the Facebook Live on your own Facebook. And Rebecca and Rob, can you just share where everyone can find you if they want to follow along with your work?
I'll put it in the chat where to find me on Facebook. I haven't done Instagram much yet, so that's probably actually I'll put my apiary website up there too.
So I'm in this crisis. That's our website, thebeeconservancy.org. And we have that social media thing where every one of our handles is slightly different from the next because of what was available and the number of character accounts. So you could find us on social. It's some version of the Bee Conservancy. Maybe there's an underscore, but really you could find them all on our website. And then you can link out to them and find us in the real-time chat space there. So thanks.
Awesome. All right, well, find us all on social media, DM us if you have other questions about bees or climate change. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We're so happy to have you and part of our community. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having us. This was fun.
Thank you. Tons of fun.